If you're the kind of person who believes that intelligence always finds a way to speak for itself, like this video, subscribe right now and stay with us until the very end. This story is one you are going to want to see through. The laughter started low. It began somewhere in the back of Senator Richard Hollis's throat, a soft, dismissive sound, the kind a person makes when they've decided the thing in front of them isn't worth taking seriously. Then it grew, unhurried and comfortable, into something fuller, something that filled the hearing room the way smoke fills a space, gradually, then all at once. He didn't try to hide it. That was the part that made people remember it afterward. He wasn't embarrassed by his own contempt. He leaned back in his leather chair on the elevated panel, adjusted his microphone with one hand, and looked down at the woman seated at the witness table with the particular expression of a man who has spent 50 years being told that his opinion is the most important one in any room he enters. "Dr. Anya Wells," he said, drawing out each syllable like he was reading from a list of things that amused him. "With all due respect, and I am trying to give you the benefit of the doubt here, what you're suggesting contradicts the work of some of the most decorated scientists in the world, people who have spent their careers on this exact question." He gestured vaguely at a document in front of him. "Dr. Emil Krause, Nobel laureate, published extensively on this. Are you telling this committee that you know something he doesn't?" The room tittered. A few of the other senators on the panel smiled. The cameras kept rolling. Anya Wells set down her pen. She folded her hands on the table in front of her. And then she looked up at Senator Hollis with an expression that was not anger, not embarrassment, and not the apologetic softening that the room seemed to be waiting for. It was patience. The specific, deep patience of someone who has been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment. "Senator," she said, "I don't just know something Dr. Krause doesn't. I'm the one who corrected him." The laughter stopped. Anya Wells had grown up in a small house in rural Mississippi, the middle child of 5, raised by a mother who cleaned offices for a living and a father who drove long-haul trucks and was home maybe 12 weeks out of every year. The house had one bookshelf, and it was full, not because her parents were academics, but because her mother had a near-religious belief that books were the one investment that couldn't be repossessed. Anya had read every one of them by the time she was 11. When she ran out, she started walking to the public library 2 miles away on Saturdays and checking out the maximum number allowed, which was 7. She read those in a week and went back. The librarian, a retired biology teacher named Mrs. Elaine Dupree, noticed the pattern and started setting books aside, science books mostly, because that was what Anya always gravitated toward first. At 14, Anya entered a state science competition with a project on the way water temperature affected the behavior of single-celled organisms. She won. The judge who gave her the award shook her hand and told her she had a future in science. She thanked him politely and thought, even then, that the word future was doing a lot of heavy lifting, as though it were something distant and uncertain rather than something she had already decided. She attended college on a full academic scholarship, majored in molecular biology, and completed her dissertation on protein-folding behavior in cellular stress responses at 26. By 30, she had been published in 3 of the field's most respected journals. By 34, she was leading her own research lab at a federally funded research institute in Washington, D.C., one of only a handful of black women in the country running a lab at that level, in a field where that particular combination of identity and position remained, despite all of the progress people liked to announce at conferences, genuinely rare. Her specific area of work was in what the field called heat shock protein response, the way cells behaved when placed under extreme thermal stress. It was dense, technical, and deeply unsexy to anyone outside the scientific community. It also happened to have enormous implications for everything from cancer treatment to the development of climate-resilient crops, which was why her lab had, over the previous 7 years, attracted consistent federal funding, and why she had, on 3 separate occasions, been called to testify before Senate subcommittees as an expert witness. She had never enjoyed the hearings. The dynamic was always the same, politicians with no scientific background asking questions that revealed, in their phrasing, that they had not read the briefing materials, while scientists with decades of expertise tried to compress complex truths into sound bites short enough to survive cable news. She found it exhausting, but she believed in the process, in the principle that science should be accountable to the public and that public servants deserved access to the best available evidence. So she came, she prepared, she sat at the table. The hearing that would change everything was convened by the Senate Subcommittee on Science, Research, and Innovation, ostensibly to examine federal funding priorities for climate-related biological research. The session had been scheduled for 3 hours. Anya was the third of 4 witnesses. She had submitted a 40-page written testimony in advance and prepared a 15-minute verbal summary. Senator Richard Hollis was not a member of the Science Subcommittee. He had been added to the panel as a substitute for a colleague who was traveling, a procedural convenience that nobody had thought much about, because these substitutions happened regularly and usually without consequence. Hollis was a 3-term senator from a southern state, a former insurance lawyer, and a man whose relationship to scientific inquiry could be charitably described as skeptical and less charitably described as hostile. He had, over the course of his career, voted against federal science funding 14 times. He had once described climate research as a growth industry for people who like to be alarmed. He had also, in preparation for this particular hearing, apparently done some reading, or had a staffer do some reading, about the scientific figures in the space. He had arrived with notes. He was ready to make a point, and when Anya Wells sat down at the witness table, he had already decided what he thought of her. The first hour of the hearing went the way these things generally went. The opening witnesses, both senior researchers from major universities, presented their testimony, answered questions with careful precision, and navigated the usual mix of genuine curiosity and performative skepticism that characterized these panels. Hollis asked one question in this stretch, a vague query about return on investment for basic research that the second witness answered patiently and thoroughly. Hollis wrote something on his notepad. He did not appear to be listening. When Anya was introduced, she settled into her chair, poured herself a glass of water from the carafe provided, and began her verbal summary. She was a composed speaker, clear, unhurried, technically precise without being inaccessible. She spoke about her lab's recent findings on heat shock protein behavior under elevated temperature conditions, and what those findings suggested about cellular adaptation mechanisms in plants. She explained why this mattered for agricultural resilience in the context of changing climate conditions. She cited 3 recent studies, including one from her own lab published 4 months earlier. She was midway through her third point when Hollis interrupted. "Dr. Wells," he said, "I want to stop you there because I'm looking at some material here and what you're describing sounds very different from what I'm reading." Anya paused. "Of course, Senator. What are you reading?" He held up a printout. "This is from the work of Dr. Emil Krause, Nobel Prize in Chemistry, 2019. He concluded, and I'm looking at this directly, that the protein stress response pathway you're describing operates on a fundamentally different mechanism than the one you're presenting to this committee. So I guess my question is, who should this committee believe? A Nobel laureate, or—" He gestured toward her in a way that completed the sentence without finishing it. There was a brief pause in the room. One of the other panel members shifted in their seat. A staffer near the door looked up from their phone. Anya did not rush to fill the silence. She let it sit for 2 full seconds, which in a Senate hearing room feels considerably longer than 2 seconds in ordinary life. "Could you tell me which paper you're referencing, Senator?" she asked. Hollis looked down at his printout. "It's titled, let me find it here, Thermal Stress Response in Eukaryotic Cells, a Revised Framework, 2018. Another pause. "Shorter this time?" "I'm familiar with that paper," Anya said. "Good, then you know it contradicts your position." "It did," she said, "when it was first published." Hollis frowned. "Excuse me?" The 2018 paper contained a significant methodological error in the temperature calibration protocol used during the experimental phase. The error affected the core dataset. Dr. Krause's team identified it 18 months after publication. She reached into the folder in front of her and produced a document. The paper was formally corrected in 2020. The corrected version aligns with the framework I'm presenting today. Hollis stared at her. "You're saying a Nobel Prize winner made a mistake?" "I'm saying his team made a calibration error in one paper, identified it, and corrected it. That's how science works, Senator. I'd be happy to submit the correction notice and the revised dataset to the committee record if that would be helpful." Hollis, who had clearly not anticipated any of this, defaulted to the weapon most available to him in that moment. Dismissal, he leaned back. He smiled the smile of a man retreating into the comfort of his own authority. And then he laughed, that low, rolling, comfortable laugh, and said, "With all due respect, Dr. Wells, I think we can trust a Nobel Prize winner's body of work over a single correction." The room tittered. The cameras kept rolling, and Anya Wells set down her pen, folded her hands, and looked up. "Senator," she said, "I don't just know something Dr. Cross doesn't. I'm the one who corrected him." The laughter stopped so suddenly it was almost a physical thing, like a switch had been thrown. One of the panel members leaned forward. A journalist in the press gallery stopped typing. Senator Patricia Moorhead, the subcommittee chair sitting 2 seats from Holly's, removed her reading glasses. Anya continued, her voice unchanged in its register and its pace. "The calibration error in the 2018 paper was identified during a cross-validation study conducted by my lab in 2019. We published our findings in the Journal of Cellular Biochemistry in March of that year. Dr. Cross's team reached out to us directly after our publication. We had several months of correspondence, shared our raw data with them, and worked collaboratively to understand the discrepancy. The formal correction to Dr. Cross's paper was published in 2020 and cites our work as the basis for the revision." She reached into her folder again and produced 2 more documents, which she slid toward the committee aide at the end of the table. "I've included our 2019 publication and the correction notice in my supplementary materials, which were submitted to the committee 3 weeks ago as part of my written testimony." She paused one more time. "Page 31 if anyone would like to look." Nobody moved for a moment. Then the subcommittee chair, Senator Moorhead, picked up her copy of the written testimony and turned to page 31. She read for several seconds. She set the document down. "Dr. Wells," she said, "I want to make sure the committee understands what it's hearing. Are you saying that Dr. Cross, the Nobel laureate whose work Senator Holly's just cited, acknowledged your lab's role in correcting his published research?" "Yes," Anya said. "He was generous about it, actually. He sent a letter to my department head commending the rigor of our methodology. I can provide that as well if the committee would find it useful." Senator Moorhead looked at Holly's. The look lasted perhaps 3 seconds, and contained the specific, concentrated weight of 3 seconds between 2 people who have worked together for a long time and understand exactly what is being communicated. Holly's was looking at his printout. He was looking at the 2018 paper, the original, uncorrected version, the one his staffer had pulled and he had arrived with, confident and ready to use as a weapon. And he was understanding, in real time, that he had walked into this room holding a document that the scientific community had superseded 4 years earlier. "Senator Holly's," another panel member said, a younger senator from the West Coast named David Ockhaffer. "Do you have any further questions for Dr. Wells, or shall we allow her to continue her testimony?" Holly said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "No, please continue." And Anya Wells continued. She completed her 15-minute summary without further interruption. She described her lab's current work, outlined the funding priorities she was recommending, and answered questions from 4 other panel members, substantive questions, asked with the attentiveness of people who had just recalibrated how seriously they intended to take this particular witness. The hearing ran 30 minutes over its scheduled time, largely because the questions kept coming. When it was over, 3 senators approached the witness table personally. Senator Moorhead shook Anya's hand and said something brief and direct that the journalists in the room couldn't quite hear, but that Anya would later describe, when pressed, only as kind. Holly's had left the room before the closing statements were finished. The clip circulated first on social media, a 45-second cut of the exchange, from Holly's laughter to Anya's final line before she continued her testimony. It was the kind of clip that spreads not because of algorithm or promotion, but because people keep sending it to each other directly, with messages like "you need to see this and watch until the end." Within 24 hours, it had been viewed 11 million times. By the end of the week, it had crossed 60 million. The coverage that followed was widespread and largely consistent in its framing. Science journalists wrote about the substantive content, the corrected Cross paper, the implications of Anya's research, the broader question of what it meant that a senator had arrived at a science hearing with outdated materials and used them to publicly demean a witness. Political journalists wrote about Holly's, his history of skepticism toward science funding, and the optics of his behavior. Cultural commentators wrote about what the moment represented, placing it in a longer history of Black women scientists being dismissed, interrupted, and talked over in rooms that needed their expertise. Anya declined most of the interview requests that came in during the first 2 weeks. She issued one statement through her institution, which was characteristically measured. She appreciated the public interest in the hearing. The work her lab was doing was more important than the moment that had drawn attention to it. and she hoped the conversation that had been sparked would ultimately serve the cause of evidence-based policy. She did one television interview, 6 weeks after the hearing, on a science-focused program that she had appeared on before. The host, who knew her work and respected it, asked her the question everyone wanted answered. What had it felt like in that room when Hollies laughed? She was quiet for a moment. "It's not the first time," she said finally. "I want to be clear about that. That moment got filmed and millions of people saw it, but it was not the first time someone in a position of authority decided, before I opened my mouth, that I wasn't worth taking seriously. That happens to a lot of people. It's happened to me throughout my career." She looked at the host evenly. "What was different that day was that I happened to have information that made the truth visible quickly. Usually the truth takes longer to show up. Sometimes it never does." She paused. "What I want people to take from it isn't that I won a moment. I don't feel like I won anything. I feel like I did my job. What I want people to take from it is that the information was always there. I had submitted it in writing 3 weeks before the hearing in the document that was given to every member of that panel." She shook her head slightly. "Someone chose not to read it. That's a choice with consequences." Senator Hollies issued a statement 5 days after the clip went viral. It was 2 paragraphs long and described the exchange as a miscommunication arising from staff research materials that were not current. It did not include an apology. It did not mention Anya by name. The statement was not well received. A coalition of 17 scientific societies, including 2 that Hollies had interacted with regularly on legislation, sent a joint letter to the Senate Science Subcommittee requesting clearer protocols around witness preparation and panel member conduct at expert hearings. The letter was cordial in tone and devastating in specificity. 2 months after the hearing, Senator Moorhead's subcommittee approved a funding package for climate-related biological research that was, in both scope and structure, closely aligned with the priorities Anya had outlined in her testimony. It was the largest such allocation in 11 years. Anya's lab received a significant portion of that funding. The research it enabled would, over the following 3 years, contribute to the development of a heat-tolerant protein marker used in the early detection of certain stress-related cellular dysfunctions, work that several colleagues described, in the field's careful, qualified language, as genuinely significant. Dr. Emil Kraus, who had followed the public story with what those who knew him described as a mix of embarrassment and admiration, sent Anya a personal email the week after the hearing clip went viral. He said he was glad the correction had been visible, that the collaboration between their teams had been one of the more productive experiences of his later career, and that if she was ever in Vienna, she should come to his lab, and he would buy her coffee and argue about methodology for an afternoon. She replied that she would hold him to it. She did not return to that Senate subcommittee hearing room for another 8 months, when she was called again to testify on a follow-up review of the funded programs. The panel had changed. Hollies was not present, having stepped back from the committee, and the atmosphere was different in a way that was hard to name precisely but easy to feel. The chair opened by thanking the witnesses for their written materials, which she said had been reviewed thoroughly in advance. Anya said she was glad to hear it. She set her pen on the table, poured herself a glass of water, and began. There is a version of this story that ends with a lesson about perseverance or resilience, one of those tidy conclusions that ties things together and sends you away feeling like the world makes sense. But the more honest version ends somewhere more complicated than that, with the recognition that Anya Wells should never have had to bring a correction notice to a Senate hearing to prove she deserved to be listened to. That the preparation, the documentation, the careful composure, all of it was real and earned and hers, but none of it should have been necessary as proof of her right to be in that room. She was there because she was among the best in her field. That should have been enough. It was enough. It just took a moment of someone else's carelessness for the room to see it clearly. And once a room sees something clearly, it is very difficult to make it unsee. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe, because this channel exists to tell exactly these kinds of stories. The ones about people who did the work, held the truth, and waited for the room to catch up. There are more coming, don't miss them.